The 10-Minute Treasurer. My name's Jeff Pospisil, and we're going to cover clergy compensation for 2024. And so I'm aiming at the Global Methodist churches here. So if you're not Global Methodist or not curious about them, go ahead and skip it. But if you are interested in clergy compensation for Global Methodist for the year 2024, I got a spreadsheet for you and a couple of forms and some information. All right, so I have the PDF version in front of us right now. And big differences between this version and then the Excel version that I'm going to show you later is that the Excel version does the math for us. The PDF version, there's instructions that are hopefully helpful in helping us do the math correctly, because especially around that pension calculation, that's the most complicated one. The PDF version, what I normally like to do, I mean, a person could just print this out and then fill it in by hand, but I like to fill it out right here on my screen. And when I do that, normally I like to use Adobe Reader. If you open this up, it'll open up in a web browser as well, but sometimes it doesn't save everything that you fill in. So I encourage you to consider using Adobe Reader. It's free. I'll put a link in the description for how to download that. So when we're looking at this, the first part to pay attention to is the status and then full or part-time. And the reason that's important is because the status and the full or part-time determines what benefits your pastor is eligible for. So elders and deacons, there's no limitation to what they're eligible for. Lay ministers are currently not eligible for pension or health insurance through the Global Methodist denomination. We anticipate adding lay pastors and lay employees to the pension part in 2024. Senior is similar to retired status. In other denominations, they might be known as retired. Senior, there's no retirement in the Global Methodist denomination for clergy, but it does change what benefits you're eligible for and what the expectations are for a pastor in senior status. One thing I'm missing is I know we're going to have some pastors from another denomination, and those would not be eligible for benefits either. So you could either leave this blank or hit lay or senior. A lot of times they are retired from another denomination. So when we look at full or part-time, pastors that are quarter time are not eligible for any benefits. And then if you're half-time and above, you're eligible for pension. And then 3/4 time and above, you're eligible for death and disability insurance. And then full-time, you're eligible also for the health insurance as well. Effective date, looking and going into 2024, most likely this is going to be January 1, unless there's like a mid-year change. When we look at the base salary here, that's just your annual salary. And I'm just going to put in a number just for a placeholder as we start looking at this. This other compensation, it's not used all the time, but sometimes I'll see a church that might give a Social Security allowance, or maybe they have a bonus built into there, or some other kind of taxable compensation. So I'm mainly looking for taxable compensation. If you have non-taxable compensation, so let's say you set up a QSERA, Qualified Small Employer Health Reimbursement Account, or maybe you set it up to where your educational plan allows you to pay down the pastor's seminary debt or something like that. Any of that stuff that's not taxable, I would encourage you to put it down here in this section 3 near the bottom of the page as other expenses, and go ahead and put a description there. All right, then you add these two together, and here the math is not too tough yet, $40,000. Then there's this designated housing exclusion, and that is designated housing exclusion. It's just for tax purposes. It doesn't affect how much the church actually pays, but it does affect how much the pastor could pay in taxes. So if they put 0, that means they're not allowed to write off any unreimbursed housing costs. If they put 5,000, then ends up being the cap. So let's just put it in 5,000. Again, the church is just going to pay out the 40,000, but for tax purposes, we're going to tell the IRS that we're paid them 35,000 because 5,000 of that is for housing expenses. And the pastor then has to prove that to the IRS and their tax accountant. Then the parsonage, is a parsonage provided? So yes, if a parsonage is provided, or no, if it's not. If there's no parsonage, it's pretty common for a church to then provide a cash housing allowance. So if you, let's say you plug in 15,000. So this is additional tax cash that the church is paying out. So they're paying out 40,000 plus the 15,000. So they're paying out 55,000. And they could still have a designated housing exclusion. So let's just say, for example, the pastor is estimating that their housing costs are going to be $20,000, but the church is providing 15. So then the pastor could say, well, I want an additional from my regular salary, I want to exclude $5,000, and that's totally appropriate. But again, this does not affect how much you pay the pastor. This right here does. Now here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. So we're going to start off with the pension piece, and there is a calculation. It says, see the calculation at the bottom of page 2. And I'll walk you through this because it is, like I say, it's a little bit more complicated. This is the worst part of it, by the way. So $40,000, I just brought that number from up above, section 1, line C. That's that total compensation. Then there's this housing adjustment. So if there's no parsonage provided, we just enter in any cash housing allowance. So if it was at 15,000, that's what we would include. If they live in a parsonage, what we do is we say that 25% of their salary is counts towards their compensation for housing. So if we say they're living in a parsonage, so we multiply this 40,000 by 25%, and that gives us 10,000. And then we just add these two numbers together. That gives us the pension compensation of $50,000. So this is another important number to keep in mind, the pension compensation. And then we're not done yet, because we have to look at what is the pastor contributing. Because how the Global Methodist plan is set up, the church automatically gives 5% of this pension compensation, and then they will match up to 5% of whatever the pastor contributes. So if the pastor is giving 5%, and the church has that 5% that they're matching, plus the additional 5%, that's 10%. So if you read this, it says, take the percentage the pastor is personally contributing and add 5%. And it can't be over 10%. So if the pastor's contributing 20%, you're still putting down the 10%. And then you just multiply these numbers together, and I'll put a percentage sign there. There should be a percentage sign there. So that would make it 5,000. So when we're back over to here, we'd plug in that 5,000. Health insurance, the costs are right up here. So you could see that right here, 28,000 for family coverage. If it's the pastor plus one other, whether it's a spouse or a child or some other dependent, 20,592. If it's only the pastor, it's 10,848. So we'll throw in 10,848. Death and disability insurance. So this depends a lot on the age of your pastor. So for a pastor that's really young, it might be close to 0.5% of that pension compensation. For a pastor that's near retirement, it might be closer to our near senior status, whatever. It might be closer to 3%, and then somewhere in between for anybody else. So what I normally say is look at your last billing and multiply it by 4, because it's a quarterly billing. So I'll just throw in something here. Animal reimbursement, I'm just going to throw in a number there. Again, this covers travel and meals and that kind of thing. Then if there's any other expenses, you can include them there. And then the big one that I want you to be aware of is I want this to include the total cost of the compensation for the pastor. So we're talking about all these ones here. We're also talking about the total compensation here, plus any cash housing allowance right there. And so we take the total and, oh goodness, what is that? 55, 65, 70, looks like 75,048. Probably pretty close. I hope so. So then we could take that total compensation. So if you have more than one church, this will help you split it out. So a lot of times, if it's just a 1-point charge, it's just that 100%. But you could put whatever percent here. and then the name of the church is here, and then take that percentage. So if it was only one church, so you don't have to fill this out then. But let's just say it was two churches and one of them is at 80%, and then the other one is at 20%. So you could then do the math and figure that out. That way we have it documented what our agreement is that this church is going to pay for 80% of that 75,000. This other church is going to pay for 20%. And then this part you don't have to fill out right away, but if this is where it would be nice to save the document, because after they go through their enrollment and health benefits, assuming your pastor's on the benefits, then this will help you guide you through actually paying the pastor. So you would log into, it says to log into benefits access. So the pastor would have to do that and then go to health details, plan details, benefit summary. And then there's all these amounts here. And so you'd look for the total premium minus the premium credit. And I think that's near the bottom of the page. And you put whatever that amount is. One of the things I have to say is that these are most of the time monthly amounts. So this is a monthly amount that it'll give you in benefits access. So you need to multiply it by 12. So I'm just going to plug in a number. That's too high of a number. So I'm going to plug in that number. Health savings account, they give you the annual amount there. So if the pastor is giving that, and the employer maybe has that piece, those are all reported there. Then you have your healthcare flexible spending account, and then the dependent care flexible spending account. And then here is where, again, you need to know the pastor's percentage, but then you also need to know, do they want it before tax, after tax, and Roth? And almost all the time it's before tax. The handful do Roth as well. So we could just throw in that amount right here. And I do have a calculator coming out that'll help you then run payroll and help you figure out what to report on the W-2, because I know not everybody goes to a CPA or goes to a tax professional when they're trying to do all this. A lot of times we try to do it on our own the best we can, and that's cool. All right, let's try to fly through this Excel one then. I'm already kind of long already. This is very similar, by the way, to the other one in its look. You could see, actually, I switched the view so you could see the header. So you can see the header there. And I do put this in there. Give a copy of this to the person responsible for payroll, because it's just so important that our pastors are paid correctly and the wages are reported correctly. I'm going to switch this then also to full screen mode and scroll back to the top. So instead of the radio buttons like we had in the PDF version, there's a drop down. So kind of handy. And those drop downs, then they do affect a lot of the formulas. So I'm going to throw in 40,000, I think is what we did here. And then 5,000 for the housing exclusion. I'm going to put them in the parsonage. When you get to this local parish expense, one of the challenges, again, we went through the pension contribution, is we only have the church's 5% right here. And this note says is add the pastor's contribution percentage into the section 4. So section 4 is right here. And when we look, here's the pastor's contribution percentage. You can see there's a warning here as well. So if the pastor does that full 5%, and they do it as before tax, then it will accurately calculate it. And so you can see we're at the 5,000. And you can also see the reason it makes it a lot easier. If I put 10,000 or 10%, it's still just the 5,000. If I put 0, you don't get the warning message, but you do see it's just that 5%, so 2,500. So I'm going to switch that back to 5%. And then we have the health insurance. And here you elect the coverage. So opt out, pastor only, pastor plus one, or family. So we chose pastor only, and it'll just fill in these amounts automatically. And I do give a little bit of the who's eligible for what up here. This one, I know I have it calculated, But that's just my best guess. And I tried to cut it in the middle, So a lot of pastors were at 3%, a lot of were at 0.5%, but in the average, it was right around 1.5%. So that's what I have automatically. But again, I would use your most current billing. I can't remember what I chose. Was it 1,200 and 3,000 for this? I think last time actually I um, had them in a cash housing allowance, didn't I? Oh, it was 15,000. I'm going to change that to no. I don't have a lot of, by the way, I don't have a lot of protections on this. So probably it should give you a warning if they're not eligible for health insurance, but I just didn't want to do that because I'm kind of afraid of making it annoying versus helpful. I do have stuff protected. So you can't just click on a formula and just change it. You'll get this error message here, but I really didn't lock it down. So you can go to the review tab, and you could just unprotect it. And then you could do whatever you want with it. Um, so you can break it if you want to, or you could perfect it if you want to. Anyway, so then here is the parish percentages. So again, last time I said 80 and 20, and it'll do the math for you. So again, I just like it when it does the math for me. The pastor's share of the costs, and again, we're looking for the annual amounts. So these ones here are monthly amounts. These three here are monthly amounts. The pastor's share of health and the healthcare flexible spending and dependent care flexible spending. I don't remember what I put for these. Put 1,200 and 2,400 and 1,000. Probably nothing for that. Usually, if you have a health savings account, you normally don't have a flexible spending as well for health or medical related costs, but you sometimes might still have dependent care. And here's the nice thing about the Excel version is this is really made for the person doing payroll. So now, how often are you paying your pastor? Are they paid twice a month? Are they paid once a month, monthly? Are they paid biweekly? Or are they paid weekly? That's probably the least common, but semi-monthly is usually the most common. So that's going to take all this information and turn it into hopefully stuff that's helpful for you. So if they have any taxes withheld, so they can do voluntary withholding on their W-4. And so if the pastor is withholding $200, for example, per paycheck, that's a per paycheck amount, what the W-4 does. That's going to go ahead and do the math for you. You can see the formula up here, but basically I'm figuring it out that every paycheck should be $1,802.08. And that will, of course, change depending on if it's monthly or whatever. Your pension bill, of course, that didn't change. You probably saw that when I was flipping around. That didn't change at all, but it breaks it down like our pension bills are broke down. So here's the church share, the pastor share, and then the church share, the pastor share for each of these ones. The death and disability is only the church share, and that's billed quarterly, while the rest are billed monthly. And the one that I like the most is I like a little bit of a heads up when I get calls about from a church wanting to know how to fill out the pastor's W-2. I normally run some version of this because I like it to go ahead and fill it out for me. So I know this is how much is going to go on their box one. So the wages is going to be reported as 28,000. This is how much tax was withheld. So again, you can see that one change right here. It doesn't change the amount of taxable income, but it changes the amount of taxes withheld. This is the dependent care. This is the before tax contribution. So again, if we change that, let's change it to Roth. And you can see that just moves it to this one, which is the Roth one. And then this one is the HSA one. And that's why you need both parts of these. So the employer share as well as the employee share, because it adds both those together. That's what the IRS wants to know, is how much total is being contributed. All right, this part's not going to be super helpful, but coming up soon, we're going to have a form where we'll be able to receive the amount that the pastor is being compensated, as well as that percentage. And so there'll be a form, I don't know exactly where, but I would guess it's going to be right around here somewhere. That doesn't help at all. But anyway, there'll be a place where you could report the pastor's compensation as well as the percent that they're contributing, assuming that they're on pension. And that way we could go ahead and make sure they're accurately set up and everything works, hopefully like clockwork then for them. All right. Hopefully that was okay. That was kind of long, I know, and a lot of information to hopefully share with you. I'm going to put some online calculators to help, especially when I think about the payroll. That's always the trickiest piece. So to be able to get that set up correctly and be able to pay the correct amount. And then also for connectional funding, I'll put another video out about that as well. All right. Till next time, God bless.